Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I welcome you all to this webinar on exclusivity competition concerns. I'm thankful to the participants for having given an overwhelming response. We have 500 plus registrations as of now, and we are going to discuss this topic amongst ourselves. We have a panel of three with us, and the fourth panelist is my team who will be joining at the Q&A session. So let me briefly introduce the panel to you. So we have three panelists. I am M.M. Sharma. I'm an advocate of Delhi High Court and Supreme Court and specialize in antitrust and competition law practice since last 11 years. I have regulatory and industry experience as well, having worked as additional registrar in the Competition Commission of India during its formative days. And I've also worked as in-house counsel as head legal in Jindal Steel and Power Limited. I have with me Mr. Amit Bhasin, whom you can see on the screen just now. He is the General Manager, Law and Company Secretary of a well-known multinational company, Hindustan Unilever. Mr. Bhasin has over 16 years of experience in corporate legal business partnering, corporate compliance and governance. He has worked across organization in consumer sectors. He has worked on several M&A transactions for Unilever, and he is a part of the global competition law network for Unilever and drives competition awareness and compliances across South Asia for Unilever. We are very fortunate to have Mr. Bhasin with us. Thank you, Mr. Bhasin, for joining us. I am also joined with me by my colleague Anand Sri, who will be joining us shortly. He is a senior associate in our team, and he is the core member of our team, specializing in antitrust. And he has experience of over 6 years. He is a very focused lawyer on competition matters. And then I also have Chams Matthew, who's running presently at the back. Chams, can you show yourself for a moment so that everybody can see you? Well, I think he is going to show it slightly. So after the lockdown, friends, I was thinking during the lockdown of doing some kind of a knowledge updation series for the corporate. So this idea came to my mind that there are certain issues which we keep on getting queries from the from our clients, and this issue of exclusivity is a major issue, which I find that we keep on getting queries from the clients, and then based on our experience which I derived, I thought of starting this first webinar on this topic of exclusivity. And mind you, this is our first in our knowledge series on competition law. We plan to do a series of webinars going forward, depending on the response we get from the audience. And this particular issue came to my mind. Why I was prompted to take up this issue was for the recent CCI decision in March this year against a very large industrial house, well known for abusing its dominant position by forcing exclusive supplies on its buyers by asking monthly production data for calculating the discounts applicable to them and following a non-transparent and discriminatory pricing policy for giving discount to the buyers. This case is well known. I will not take names, but the fact is that this case actually prompted me to take up this topic for this webinar. So let's begin now. So we will have a PPT. You can see a PPT in front of you. I will begin with an overview of whether and how exclusive clauses in commercial agreements can raise competition concerns, how the competition law looks at them, at these categories of vertical restrictions, generally based on EUS and EU guidelines, with a few references to some notable selected Indian cases also. Thereafter, Mr. Bhasin will give the industry perspective from his vast experience as an in-house counsel in HUL, and thereafter my colleague Anand Sri will take us through the rest of the presentation, particularly in the defenses available. We will have a Q&A session at the end, and I will request all the participants to keep on sending the questions in the box which is provided I think below the panel, and we'll keep on collecting them and we'll answer them at the end of the webinar. So I begin with this webinar. Frankly, I'll give you an overview. So what is meant by exclusivity clauses in commercial agreements? But before I begin, I must have a caveats. I must, as a lawyer, that we are used to be giving caveats. So the first, apart from the usual disclaimer which we give, that anything stated by us during this webinar does not constitute or is a substitute to a legal opinion. And the webinar is organized just for academic purposes as knowledge updation program as part of our advocacy efforts. There is another specific caveat which I like to say. So exclusivity clauses in commercial agreements are entered into both between direct competitors at the horizontal level as pure non-compete restrictions, say between two parent companies who are trying to form a joint venture. So they'll have a non-compete with the joint venture entity for some time, as well as between firms which operate at a vertical level, that is manufacturers and their dealers. So while non-compete restrictions at the horizontal levels are evaluated rather more rigorously under section 3(3) of the Competition Act, I think lawyers who have joined us would know, the exclusivity clauses at the vertical levels are evaluated under the rule of reason after balancing both the pro and anti-competitive factors given under the Act, that is section 19(3). Now on the non-compete part, which I just referred on the horizontal side, I'll just make a comment that what is the guideline available. So CCI has come out with a guidance note. Some of you might have seen this on the website. CCI guidance note on non-compete, it is titled, and it cracks what it says is that whether the non-compete restriction is directly related to or is it necessary as well as proportionate and reasonable. So directly relation to the object, this, and proportionate to the objective which it seeks to achieve, that is the efficiency. Obviously joint venture you create for creating efficiencies, so it has to be beyond, it has to be proportionate to the kind of objective which you're seeking to achieve. And this guidance note, of course, they have invited comments, and I'm sure some of you will be considering that. So, but in this webinar, friends, we'll be only dealing with the vertical level. That is, due to limited time we have, we will discuss only the vertical exclusivity restrictions. So, an exclusive dealing arrangement or dealing restrictions, as I call it, arises when one firm agrees not to deal with the competitor or some categories of competitors of another firm which operates at a different stage of production. They occur when a seller agrees to sell all or most of its output of a product or service exclusively to a particular buyer. It can also happen in the reverse situation, when a buyer agrees to purchase all or most of its requirement from a particular seller. Please note how our Competition Act defines only one category. So if you read the definition of the exclusive supply agreement given in section 3(3)(b) of our Act, you will find it covers only one side. That is the restriction placed on by the seller, that is the supplier. It doesn't cover the restriction placed by the buyer, and it is not presently covered. And just to add to, because it's quite pertinent to mention here, that what has happened is that the CCI over a period of time, over a period of 10 years of its enforcement of the law, has actually made itself in a position, it has made itself as if it is not able to look into the buyer's restrictions. So the restrictions created by buyers, for example, are mostly dismissed as buyer's choice, so they will not interfere. And this has been the experience which we have had about 10 years. Maximum cases by the PSU buyers, for example, who have placed restrictions on the sellers, have been closed. And of course, that is a different topic altogether, and I have very strong views on that. We may discuss it later. But just to mention pertinently that this point has been taken by the Competition Law Review Committee, which was appointed by the Government of India, High-Powered Review Committee. The CLRC committee report actually notices it. That's why I thought I would mention it. So there is I'll just read out the paragraph because it's quite relevant. Give me a minute because it is just right in front of me. So it says that currently the definition of exclusive supply agreement in the explanation to section 3(4) of the Competition Act focuses on exclusivities imposed on a buyer by a seller. However, it does not expressly concern the scenario of a buyer imposing exclusivity on a seller. While the CCI decisional practice has not pointed out any enforcement gap, that's where actually I differ. In the assessment of exclusivity, the committee noted that such exclusivity tactics by buyers are well provided for in most international jurisprudences. So based on that, the committee has recommended, in order to expressly recognize the imposition of exclusivity both from the seller as well as from the buyer side, the committee recommended amendment to the definition of exclusive supply agreement in the explanation to section 3(4) of the Act. Going from this, the proposed amendment it was further agreed that the term exclusive supply agreement should be substituted with the term exclusive dealing agreement. And let me add you for information that I got the competition amendment bill in front of me, and I'm just reading out the definition which it has proposed. So exclusive supply agreement will be now replaced with exclusive dealing agreement, which, and I'm reading it, includes any agreement restricting in any manner the purchaser or the seller, as the case may be, in the course of its trade from acquiring or selling, or otherwise dealing in any goods or services other than those of the seller or the purchaser or any other person, as the case may be. So luckily for us, the lacuna in the law, which I notice has been taken note of by the government, and they are about to amend it. The bill will be placed in the parliament in the next session, I hope so. So with this background, let me proceed further. So in how this particular restriction is seen across the world. So in EU, for example, they call it single branding agreements, which are similar to an exclusive supply agreement. Under this, the buyer is either obliged or induced to purchase a particular product only from a supplier. There's 100% purchase obligation is there. This also terms as a non-compete arrangement or a quantity forcing on buyer. This is considered a strong restriction because it forecloses the other competing suppliers. Quantity forcing, on the other hand, is slightly softer form of non-compete, where the buyer is obliged or reduced or induced to purchase a large extent of his requirement. So it could be 80%, could be 70%, things like that. This may be in the form of a minimum purchase requirement or a stocking requirement, or linked to conditional rebates or two-part tariff, etc. So restrictions are considered de jure when they are in writing, agreed in writing by the parties, and de facto when they are followed as a business practice. So there's another particular peculiar form of enforcing non-compete that's called English clause. There's an English clause which actually requires a buyer to report any better offer and allows him to accept such offer only when the supplier does not match it. So if you see this slide here, I've covered this on the third bullet, English clause. If you see in the third slide, I mentioned it. So this is something similar to the right of first refusal. We must be quite familiar with this. Either meeting the competition, somebody call it meeting the competition, or right to first refuse. So that is quite popular in India. Incidentally, such clauses have the same effect as the single branding clauses on competition, because the buyer is obliged to reveal who makes the better offer. Mind you one thing, competition law means uncertainty. So any agreement or any practice which reduces the uncertainties in the market will affect competition. So reducing uncertainty is the process which is the bedrock of the fair competition in market. So mind you, a fair competitive process is always full of uncertainties. You will not be knowing what your competitor, you should not be knowing what the competitor is about to do. So a fair competitive process is always full of uncertainties for the future over outcome, which makes every market player gives the best offer in anticipation of the competition. So single branding leads to foreclosure of the market to competing suppliers, as well as soften competition between the supplier, reduces inter-store, inter-brand competition. So single branding basically reduces what is known as inter-brand competition. It will also facilitate collusion between suppliers in case of cumulative use. So now I come to the next form of the agreement, exclusivity agreement, that's called exclusive distribution agreement. So exclusive distribution agreement can take two forms. Can we have the next? Yeah, the slide is there. It can have two forms. So and on the resale side, either the supplier agrees to sell his product only to one distributor for resale in a particular territory. So which is then it is called territorial restriction, and is quite common. Or the supplier can also restrict a resale to a particular group of customers. Then it becomes a customer restriction. So in the distribution agreement, you could either have a territorial restriction or you could have a customer restriction. For example, in the pharma sector, it's quite popular for the chemists to be appointed specifically for institutional sales. So there would be specific chemists or wholesalers who will only be, or maybe CNF agents who will be only handling the government supplies, for example, hospital supplies, etc. So there's another form of distribution which I have not mentioned here, that is called the mode of distribution. So there could be a discrimination made, or there could be a distinction made in the mode of whether offline or online sales nowadays. As recently we have come across in the case of distribution, and also very recently we came across a matter came to us of distribution of domestic supplies and exports. So there was a distinction made even on that. So of late, it has been acquired a lot of importance that we keep on receiving queries, whether it is, for example, whether it is permissible to restrict some particular dealer from online sales or to allow resale only for a particular online platform. Now, incidentally, on online sales, like passive is like passive sales, and any restriction on such passive selling is considered as a hardcore restriction, at least in EU. So you can restrict your dealer, not to sell actively in a particular beyond a particular territory, but you cannot restrict him, you know, responding to the passive queries which he get directly. That's what passive sales is. So if you restrict the dealer from wooing customer through online by being on the internet, that is like a passive selling. So that is what I mean. So by the way, CCI has examined numerous allegations that e-commerce entities and product on the online, I'm talking very briefly, and product sellers enter into exclusive agreements to sell selected products on selected e-portals exclusively to exclude other e-portals or even physical or offline channels and shops, and thereby cause what is known as appreciable adverse effect on competition. However, CCI till as recent as October 19 adopted a very soft glove approach towards the e-commerce entities, considering the online platforms or online sales, not platform exactly, online sales as a substitute or alternate to the offline or physical stores, and not as a separate market, and dismiss most of the cases which came to it. You might remember the All India Confederation of Traders had gone to them earlier, and then there was Delhi, people from Delhi Vepar Singh had also won. There are many cases. So, however, in a recent by an order of 28th October 2019, for the first time, CCI considered the market for online travel agency bookings of hotels in India as a separate relevant market. And after finding that the Make My Trip MMT is a dominant e-portal in such market, refer the matter to investigation. Not only against its conduct, unilateral conduct of allegedly enforcing exclusivity on hotels availing its booking services under Section 4, but also against MMT's alleged exclusive arrangement with OYO for booking of budget hotels to allegedly exclude OYO's competitors like Tribo and Fab. So since investigation is still on, I will refrain from making any comments on this. By another order of 24th February 2020, I'm just placing the fact before you. CCI directed another investigation against MMT on a complaint filed by Tribo this time for allegedly removing it from the MMT's platform and inducing it to accept exclusivity obligations, including wide parity, like other hotel partners, as a condition to get listed again. So that investigation is also on. So from these two recent orders, you would naturally notice that the CCI is now soft, not treating them by a soft blow, but it has toughened its stand. The CCI stand is actually toughened as far as defining the relevant market for online commerce is concerned. So now the CCI has actually started defining it too narrowly, for example, in this case, confining it to the market of online travel agents instead of maybe the market for hotel bookings. It could have said hotel market for hotel bookings, which could have included both online and offline, or it could have said market for online hotel booking. But it has basically confined to only online travel agency booking. So that is what I feel is slightly narrower way of looking at market, and it's complete reversal. So apart from these notable cases, which I just, and this is very recent, March 2020, you would also recall that there is an investigation now on against Uber for not allowing retailers. This is against Flipkart. There is an investigation already on against Flipkart for not allowing retailers to come on board on fair and equitable terms after it lost in an appeal filed by the All India Online Vendor Association against CCI's order closing the case. So CCI closed the case because it found that Flipkart cannot be dominant because there is Amazon. So neither of them can be dominant, so they closed the case. Against that, an appeal was filed, and surprisingly, the competition, the NCLAT, the appellate tribunal, has accepted the appeal and directed the investigation. Similarly, investigations are also on against Uber, after it lost its appeal in the Supreme Court. The same situation. So we are actually, so these two cases are actually one-off types. So the order of NCLAT directing investigation against Flipkart and the order of Supreme Court directing investigation against Uber, because in none of these two orders, I must say, the courts, the higher courts had taken into consideration the core competition issues. They had gone by evidence, pure evidence. For example, in the case of Uber, the Supreme Court said that the very fact that Uber is losing 2,250 rupees per trip, something that like that, it is sufficiently evidence that they want to exclude competition. They just went by that. So they didn't see whether it's relevant market issues which were raised before the appeal, so they have not gone into value that. So these orders are actually kind of what I say is the kind of a reminder or the kind of a hint to the people, to the companies who are involved, that be very careful in India. So there is a competition law which is getting more and more stricter. So thus exclusive, now I'll come back to the exclusive distribution agreement affect competition at the dealer level and therefore reduce intra-brand competition and leads to market partitioning due to geographical or customer restriction. They can also be both de jure and de facto. There are other popular vertical restraints which I must also mention here briefly. There are pricing restriction, like resale price maintenance, for example, by manufacturers, or non-linear pricing restrictions, including two-part tariffs or volume and loyalty discounts or quantity fixing or quantity rationing by manufacturers, which are though analogous but not exactly similar to the dealing restrictions, though they will have similar effects on competition. But today, actually, our focus is only on the dealing restriction, so I'll confine to that. So, can we have the next slide, please? Thank you. So now this is the slide which I would like to talk a little more, because this deals with the very purpose for which these agreements are actually entered into. So why do we have exclusivity agreements? The purpose is to have efficiency enhancement, because it increases efficiency. And there is another reason. So theoretically speaking, vertical restraints, including exclusive dealing arrangements, are agreements between companies which are not directly in competition. And they are not in the same channel of production. They are not in the same line of distribution. And mostly these companies which are vertically related are not producing substitutes. They are producing complements. I hope I'm able to make myself clear. So complementary goods are made by the downstream market, and maybe the upstream player will be making a different primary product. So that's why they are generally fundamentally competitively benign, a pro-competition, because firms in a vertical relation, as against firms in direct relation, are not actually competitors. So theoretically, firms will want horizontal competitor to raise prices so that the customers come to it, but always like a vertical partner to reduce prices. So that is the kind of arrangement we have. So however, incentives of firms in a vertical relationships, therefore, incentives of a firms in a vertical relationships are always aligned towards consumer welfare and universally accepted objective of antitrust. This is obviously consumer welfare is the antitrust objective as far as presently we consider it. So the numerous ways in which the increased efficiencies can be given there, I've just given it on the bullet here, by reducing, for example, free ride among producers, by eliminating double marginalization problems, by creating quantity certification effect, by eliminating hold-up problems, relation or including relation-specific investments. We can deal that in, if there are questions, we can of course explain them, and by creating economies of scale. So these are the 6 points which I've just summed up, just to give the what is available in the literature, that what are the rationale or efficiency justification or exclusivity clause. But now I will actually turn to Mr. Bhasin to request him to give his comments, and with his experience of being an in-house counsel, how does he see these exclusivity clauses or whatever I've spoken so far? What is his view or what are the comments? And have you come across any situation where you felt that, well, there might be scrutiny required, or that might be, because basically substantial market power is the crux. If you have market power, you are vulnerable, otherwise you're not. So Mr. Bhasin, over to you, please.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Mr. Sharma, and thanks the Vaishya team for having me here in this very interesting discussion. And thanks, Mr. Sharma, to really set the context of these exclusive arrangements. I just want to say that all of you are aware, competition law is a law which is based on economics, right? That's the main fundamental of competition law, and it is a law for the commercial purpose. So the business and the understanding of the business is very, very integral to competition law. And the other first principles of competition law is saying, if you are big, it is not bad. So it doesn't say that just because your size is big, you are a bigger company. It does not say that you cannot do certain activities. In fact, it says that The whole purpose of the law is to promote competition, because competition promotes innovation, it promotes right practices, and ultimately whatever happens, the consumer gets the benefits of it, right? So that's what the fundamental of competition law in any jurisdiction comes in. It is also called as antitrust in many jurisdictions, particularly in Europe and all. Coming to, I think, exclusive agreements, those who work in business, and lawyers like me will vouch for it, that we deal with these situations day in day out. Having these discussions is something which is very, very fundamental. And while Mr. Sharma, you have given some facets of the exclusivity and where exclusivity may come in the vertical arrangements, let me kind of just try to expand the scope by talking of few more examples where one can say whether this is exclusivity or not. And I will talk about examples which are relevant to the industry that I represent here, the FMCG market, right? Very simple example of having a shelf space, right? When you go to a smaller shop, you find branding of a particular company, only that company's products being placed over there. When the consumer enters over there, you will see that is also exclusive arrangement, right? When you go to a big hypermarket, you see the products of that company being placed at the entry point to attract the attention of the consumer. Or you see those big entry banners which have been put to kind of really attract you toward that project. And those are those exclusive things which are being placed over there. You talked about e-com, right? In e-com, you will see, when you go to any of the e-com site, you will see those advertising banners coming in very clearly, and sometimes at times, if you search for a particular product, suppose you are searching for a cold drink, and if there is a exclusive arrangement with a web player of a company, you will find some of the brands coming very prominently as advertising, right? All those are various examples of exclusivity that is there. Another examples are exclusivity for events. So one can, for World Cup or for a football, right, I can have exclusive arrangement to say it will be only my product that will be kind of distributed during the particular event, right? That is also a kind of exclusivity that one can talk about. There are a lot of these recreation places which are there. We have this Imagica in near Bombay, right? One can have a arrangement over there where there's only a particular kind of a brand, or a particular brand of cold drink, or a particular brand of ice cream will be sold. So these all are various facets of exclusive arrangements. And when we look at it from a various lenses, saying it could be a product level exclusivity, it could be a proposition level exclusivity, it could also be a package level exclusivity. Like some of the packages you will find in a modern trade, generally you will not find in a general trade. Say for example, 5 kg big packs of a particular product you will find only at few areas. You talked about exclusive arrangements for launch of few products, which are what we call it as a web only or e-com only launches. So this is something which is very normal to the business and happens very, very regularly. Coming to the conventional one that you talked about, there could be various reasons why one would go for a exclusive arrangement. It could be for the purpose because you have come out with a new formulation and you want to protect that formulation. You get into exclusive arrangement with a person who is supplying it to protect your brand and IP. There could be exclusivity arrangement because you are putting a significant investment in a product. You want exclusivity for some time. And for providing actually better services to the consumer, you want exclusivity for some time. The classic example being Apple stores, right? Apple stores give you a certainty that you will get genuine Apple products over there. Also gives you a certainty that you will get right kind of a service over there, right? So that's the promise the brand is making to its customers, and for fulfilling that promise, there are those exclusive stores which are set up. And there are numerous other such examples where one can have a very, very exclusive arrangement. Various tie-ups are also exclusive, right? In the food industry, you will find with McDonald's and other chains, there are exclusive beverages which are being sold along with that. Those are exclusive arrangements again. Now, as I said in the beginning, are exclusive arrangement bad? The answer is no. Exclusive arrangement per se are not bad. You do it, quite regularly for various reasons that I said, actually to provide a better service for your consumer. I'm just reminded of a very famous case of ice cream freezer cabinet which happened in Europe, and it was a Unilever case actually. Some of you might have read it because that is something which is taught in the very beginning of the exclusive arrangement. It's a case where Unilever was alleged that you are placing these ice cream cabinets at the retail stores, thereby occupying that stores and not allowing a competitor to place their ice creams in the store. Now, as you would know, the common ice cream cabinets or even cold drink cabinets, have their own branding and everything over there. There's a significant investment that goes into it, and the simple rationale is that as a manufacturer, I want because these are perishable kind of products, I want my products to be in the right shape, in right condition when the consumer is picking it up, and I know the temperature, I know the requirements of this product, and hence I want that product to be safe in that particular cabinet, and hence I am supplying that cabinet to the retailers. Why I don't want my competitors or other products to be placed in that container? Because it can affect the food product. Ultimately, it's a food product, and it cannot, the temperature and other specifications may not work for other products. So that is a simple reason why these cabinets are provided, and you will see it's a very normal practice in India as well to have these kind of cabinets. In this particular case, the European Commission has decided, actually held it against Unilever, saying because of your market share, the fact that you are placing these cabinets and providing them free of cost to the retailers, this is something which is foreclosing the competition, and therefore the smaller players are not able to come and place their cabinets, thereby making you in a way a monopoly player of ice cream in the market, right? So those were the facts of that particular case. And as Mr. Sharma has rightly articulated in the beginning, I think a couple of things needs to be required when as a lawyer you are advising whether exclusive agreement or exclusive clauses can be built in the agreements or not. The point number one is why you are doing it. What is the purpose that you are trying to achieve? And as a lawyer, I think we need to answer whether the purpose is pro competition, whether purpose is pro consumer, and the effect of this is going to be beneficial for the consumer, right? If that bridge is crossed, then the next bridge is to say, are you a dominant player in the market? In fact, before that, what is the relevant market is something that one should really look at, and then decide whether you are a dominant player in the market. If you are a dominant player in the market, you have to be extra careful, and I'm sure Mr. Sharma will talk about what are the precautions one should take then. But I think your market share really defines whether the exclusivity clauses can be seen as anti-competitive or not. Till the time you are not a significant player and you are doing some of these things which are pro-consumer, pro-competition, and also I think time frame, if some of these decisions are for a specified period of time, some of the examples like I gave, where I am taking a exclusive window for promotion of my product, or I am launching my product on e-com for a specified period of time, or I am taking a banner in a big hypermarket for a specified period of time. If the time limit is specified, it is short and not kind of running concurrently over years, then it is seen as short-term promotion, and then that act of yours is not possibly anti-competitive, coupled with the fact what is your market positions or not. So I think those are few considerations that one would really look at while deciding whether the exclusive arrangements can be entered or not entered. As I said, they are very normal in the business, and if they are pro-competition, pro-consumer, one can really proceed with confidence. So I will stop here. Mr. Sharma, over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Bhasin. In fact, you have given very live, vivid examples of, and even your case of Hindustan Unilever in Europe. And I'm sure that you agree with us that these points which we have put up on the slide, so these are basically all over the world is accepted as defenses or commercial rationale behind the exclusivity clause. Free ride, double marginalization.
Yes.
You understand double marginalization problem, brand image, and then hold up problems, and even economies of scale. So these are basically the what I would not say excuses, but the justifications which are given and which are accepted by the authorities. It's not that they're given by the companies, but they're accepted all over the world. That's what we wanted to say in this. So let us
Sure.
proceed now. So can we have the next slide, please, Charms? Yeah. So I kindly stop here because I have to explain certain things here. So this is the, now before actually, you can see this slide here, we are now about to start the real discussion on the how the law in India sees it. But before I do that, I'd like to discuss something more with you guys, and that is that how does the exclusivity agreements are seen by the economists? So some economists have argued that vertical restraints should be subject to competition or scrutiny, because as I said, they are generally pro-competitive. They have huge efficiency benefits, which may not be anti-competitive or anti-consumer also. Ultimately, consumer benefits, as I said, because they are complements. So some economists have argued that vertical restraint should be subjected to competition or scrutiny only when they can be shown to lead to foreclosure of the markets for the new entrants. So the possibility of foreclosure represents a major competition concern for exclusive dealings or clauses in commercial agreements. This foreclosure theory is, it works like that, an upstream manufacturer with market power would use such exclusive dealing sections to prevent a potential new entrant from having access to the vital input, such as a retail distribution network, which will ultimately prevent entry and allow the dominant manufacturer to keep growing his market share. So this foreclosure theory, by the way, was actually also criticized by the Chicago School of Antitrust in the US by saying that the incumbent monopolists cannot prevent entry because there would not be any incentive for the retailer to accept restraints if new and more efficient entrants can offer a better deal. However, recent research in the post-Chicago school shows that assuming that there are two related markets, the primary and secondary market, and two monopoly profits then the monopolist can compensate one retailer by offering him the monopoly profits of the two markets, thereby actually prevent entry. Also in the secondary market, because the entry is not profitable if it does not happen in both the markets. So you can you can remember the case of car spare parts, where there are primary and secondary market, and how the car companies actually have lost that case. So this is, I mean, online, particularly the online market, also two-sided market, also this kind of trend. So basically, the theory as it stands now is that if any of the side of the player has significant market power, it can prevent it. It can. So foreclosure, beside foreclosure is the main theory. Foreclosure is the main reason for exclusivity to be seen by the competition law. But there are other exclusive dealing restraint which produce, like softening of inter-brand competition, softening of intra-brand competition between dealers. So inter-brand is when you are under the so-called Cornet-Burton model of competition model, whether you compete on prices, and intra-brand when you actually basically operate on the Cornet model, where that is competing on quantities. So the commitment problem, also the problem of a monopolist faces to prove his commitment to a dealer by offering secret discounts, etc., and raising search cost. So both consumer and thus reducing the inter-brand competition. So basically, foreclosure remains the main theory of harm for exclusivity, but apart from that, the reduction in inter-brand competition as well as intra-brand competition, the commitment problems and rising this rival search cost are also issues which are actually acknowledged by the economists. So it may, I mean, basically, exclusive restraint that impact inter-brand competition can have strong anti-competitive effects, but similar effects may not be seen in case of reduction of intra-brand competition. So basically, the competition at the manufacturer level is actually seen as more harmful. So whether a given restraint is anti-competitive or not in a given situation will depend upon what is the degree of inter-brand competition in the market. So where the inter-brand competition is vigorous, it is unlikely that the exclusive dealing restraint will have any significant anti-competitive effect, even if it reduces intra-brand competition. So in general, the restraints are harmful only when parties involved have significant market power. That's what Mr. Bhasin was also saying, and I'm repeating, that is the crux of the law all over the world, that every jurisprudence has agreed that the restrictions vertically or particularly the exclusive clauses will be seen by the competition authorities only when the player have market power. So now I'll go a little more deeper into this and take 5 more minutes into this, but framework for assessing exclusive, what is the basically legal basis? So competition regimes typically deal with exclusive dealing under one or two approaches. One approach is, as I've shown here in this slide, that either you see it as an abuse of dominance case, right? Monopolization, attempting monopolization case, or second approach that deal with the rules of related to anti-competitive agreements, or more specifically vertical agreement. For most part, the factors used in the analysis of exclusive dealings are more or less the same. I'll just run through them very quickly. That is, duration of the exclusive dealing agreement is a very important factor. Longer the duration, the more the harmful is likely to be. Generally, in EU, duration up to 5 years is considered as maximum, beyond which the block exemption is not available. In India, as per the guidance note which I referred in the beginning, the CCI had said that 3 years is the period which is justifiable for when the transfer of know-how takes place, and 2 years is when the transfer of goodwill is taking place. Of course, that is in a different context, but it still gives an idea that 3 years and 2 years, not beyond 5 years in any case. So then the next factor which has to be seen is whether alternate sources of supply or alternate means of access of the market are available. And then the level of distribution chain at which there is exclusivity, whether it is suppliers or the distributors or end users. That is also a factor. And whether the customer requests exclusivity. There could be cases where customer also requires exclusivity, maybe premium products and things like that. So then ease of entry and market dynamics, that is also important, because the entry barriers are created by the exclusivity or not. That again depends on the market power. It's all related. In the economies of scale, I already mentioned, and then the network effects or incumbency advantages. So if this background, which I've taken from the ICN guidelines, so the ICN actually has come out with a guideline paper on exclusivity. You can note it. This is called the. I'll just refer to that because I use these examine this information on the basis of that paper. It's called the ICN. Give me a minute. Is the ICN Unilateral Conduct Workbook, and there's a chapter on exclusive dealings particularly. This is a very useful document for all competition authorities, and I'm sure our CCI would also be looking for. So apart from this general guidance, what the EU, for example, looks at is there are 4 parameters under which the vertical restraints are seen, and that is covered under the EC guidelines on vertical restraints. So the first parameter is the efficiency, which has to be proved. The second is indispensability, the restriction to be indispensable to attain the stated efficiency gains. The third is it must be passed on to the consumers. The advantage of the efficiency gain must be shared with the end consumer, and non-elimination of competition is the last. So it should not eliminate competition in the substantial part of the market. So these 4 pillars, which are used for basic core, factors which are seen by the EC guidelines across, whether it is vertical guidelines, they also have a de minimis, or even in the horizontal. So they see from these 4 angles only. So exclusivity is often in Indian context, if we see, is not only related to the agreement which you have, it is even seen in the case of practice which the companies follow. So de facto, as I said, is also seen, and we have had cases where companies' policy without any agreement have been challenged before the CCI. The CCI is penalized. If you remember the case of BCCI, so BCCI actually invited, gave the right for media rights to Sony TV for 10 years. That was under an agreement, but it also curtailed the rights of players to join competing tournaments. Like if you remember, Kapil Dev started the ICL, and he was banned by the BCCI. So those are the issues which also CCI has seen and penalized. So after this, now let us go through quickly to the Indian law, as I said. So this is the Competition Act, how it looks at it. So either as Section 3(4) or Section 4. And these are the 3 areas where we will be looking at substantial market power. And can you go back to the previous slide, Chams, please? Chams, can you go to the previous slide? Okay. So substantial market power, how does substantial market power is seen? So the existence of sufficient market power, whether it leads to foreclosure. We have already discussed that foreclosure is important. Foremost to check under EU, unlike EU, there are no de minimis market share prescribed in India. Under Section 3(4), which applies in the rule of 3(4), which goes by the rule of reason only. Now, can you go to the previous slide? Previous slide, please. Can we have the previous slide, please? Thank you. So, substantial market power, anti-competitive effects under Section 3(4), and justification and defenses. That is how it is seen. Next slide, please. So I was explaining that how this substantial market power is seen. So unlike the EU, there are no de minimis market shares prescribed in India, and the CCI looks from case to case basis under section 3(4), and then examining under section 4, dominant position has to be proved. But unlike EU, which has clear-cut market share based criteria, dominant position in India is more subjectively decided by the CCI, and unless based on market realities and economic consideration. I'm not saying that the decision taken by the CCI on dominant position lacks any or is inferior to the decision taken in the EU, or for that matter. But we have adopted a different standard of analyzing the dominant position, which is more based on economic consideration. But it just certainly gives a little bit of uncertainty to the players. And thirdly, unlike EU, where single branding and quantity forcing like exclusive agreements are exempt under block exemption, provided the buyer and seller don't have more than 30% and the restriction is not beyond 5 years, there is no such clarity or guideline in India so far. So therefore, what I say is that self-assessment becomes very necessary before entering into any agreement to avoid any competition scrutiny by the CCI. So that is the message which we want to give. Now we'll come to the selective cases on how this market power assessment has been made by CCI going forward. So if you see the first bullet, this was the case where CCI decided that does not prescribe any fixed market share for determination of substantial market power. So in Automobile Dealer Association of Hathras Global Automobile, CCI endorsed a 30% market share. This was the first case in which CCI basically decided that they would go by the vertical guidelines of the European Commission, and they sort of have that 30% is the share which is required. But in subsequent cases, as we'll see, as you will see, just give me a minute. I'm just trying to open that particular slide. I'm sorry, just give me a second. So if you see the accessories World Car Audio case, this second case, this is a recent case in which prior to entering into distribution agreement, the informant was specifically asked to surrender sale of other brands and deal exclusively with the Sony's car audio products. And according to the informant, the allegation was that restricting from dealing with competing car audio products amounts to contravention of provision of section 3(4)(b), and it amounts to fixation of limits and territorial operation, blah blah. But how the CCI looked at it is that it is an important and crucial consideration for analyzing vertical restraint is the requirement of market power. That is the first thing they said. And vertical restraints are generally not perceived as being anti-competitive unless there is market power. And then the Commission observed that the market for car audio products is fragmented with the presence of large number of players without any entity enjoying a significant market power. So and the presence of other players exerts competitive constraints on the opposite parties. Therefore, they close the case. So this gives the lesson that CCI is now evolving it's in this approach from a form-based approach of a fixed market share. Let's see the next case. Next slide, please. So the next case is the Swarna Properties versus Besta Wind case. I'll just take you through. So in this case, the informant had started and had stated that an agreement was executed between the informant as and this opposite party for supply of wind turbines. And it was averred that the sale of wind turbines was conditional upon acceptance of maintenance service and appointment of opposite party as annual maintenance contractor. The informant alleged that such agreement containing exclusive service conditions requiring an informant to avail services of the opposite party was a contravention of section 3. Now, in this case, the Commission observed that there is a clause 6 of the service agreement which provided for exclusivity, wherein the informant was restrained from procuring any service or spare part from anyone else other than the opposite party for a term of 5 years. However, both the parties did have the option to terminate the contract under clause 13. So also the Commission observed the presence of many players with higher or comparable market share showed that opposite party did not have any significant market power. And similarly, in the case of Himalaya International, was a case that the allegation was that the opposite party, a multi-billionaire company, unduly influenced the informant in signing the joint venture. So here was a case where a joint venture party went to the CCI and challenged the joint venture which it itself signed. And the informant, according to the informant, there was a clause in the shareholders agreement that OP was exclusive marketing, selling and distribution entity for the informant for some frozen potato-based food products and appetizers. And the informant was barred accordingly that selling its potato food products because of the rights of exclusivity were taken by OPs to themselves. So the subsidiaries of the opposite party, which was a foreign company, which the allegation was that they were actually excluding the joint venture partner, which was an Indian partner, from entering into those areas. So the Commission went into it and said the allegations of the informant with respect to the formation, organization or operation, etc. of the JV cannot be said to be an abuse of dealing, selling and distribution arrangement was for a purpose of the JV itself. So it was ancillary to the very purpose for which it was made. And that voluntary it was adopted by the party, so it cannot be said to be a case of abuse of dominance. The Commission also noted that the clause 2.5 was amended by another clause of the master agreement, which was to replace the informant by the other opposite party. I'm sorry. So it was seen that the alleged restriction was for a very limited period. That the shareholder agreement, till it was replaced by the master agreement, only for that period the restriction was there. So the Commission said there is no going to be effect on competition, so they closed the case. Similarly, the third case, the Kearney communication case, also the Commission found that there was low barriers to entry. I'll skip the details of this matter because we have a lot of ground to cover. So if you can proceed to the next slide, please. So basically, market power has market share or market power as one of the component, and the other component the Commission will look at is entry barriers. Whether it creates an entry barrier for the new players. Fourth point is whether the company holds any essential patents or superior technology, superior portfolio, etc. So this slide actually basically summed up the four factors which the Commission has looked into in its digital practice. Next slide. So the legal position as it stands is that anti-competitive agreements effects are to be seen first. In case of section 4, which does not require proving any appreciable adverse effect on competition, but under section 3.4 there is an obligation to demonstrate appreciable adverse effect on competition, and the anti-competitive effects actually include, which have been recognized by the law, are 3: creation of barriers to new entrants, driving existing competitors out of the market, foreclosing competition by hindering entry into the market. So therefore, exclusive supply agreement has these 3 or 4 anti-competitive effects, which are recognized by the Act itself. And the anti-competitive agreement for the exclusive distribution agreement are, as I said, reduced intra-brand competition, lead to market partition by distributors, and also market foreclosure sometime because of the repeated intra-brand competition. So with this, I would sort of try to stop here and give it to Anand to discuss the defenses which are available in the jurisprudence available. That what defenses you can take if you are basically facing a scrutiny by the CCI. Over to Anand.
Thank you, Mr. Sharma. A very good evening to all of you, and
Disruption in between.
thank you all for joining this session. So I'll be covering the defenses available uh, for an alleged anti-competitive exclusive arrangement. For the ease of reference, I have uh, categorized the defenses available into two parts. Um, I draw your attention to slide number 19, where I've categorized the defenses available. One is the preliminary defense that one would take in case of an alleged anti-competitive exclusive agreement is, of course, the lack of market power. So Mr. Sharma has already dealt with this aspect in detail in the previous slides, so I'll merely touch upon it. The premise of the market power argument is that the entity which enforces it does not have the market power to foreclose competition in the market, and therefore, although there is an exclusive arrangement, it does not cause AAC in the market because owing to the lack of market power of the entity enforcing the exclusivity condition. Coming to the substantive defenses that one can take, uh, the Act itself provides for two exceptions which parties can avail of in the case of exclusive arrangement. Uh, this is provided under subsection 5 of section 3, which are the IPR defense and the exports defense. Although it has to be noted, can we have the previous slide, please? Slide number 19, 19. Yes. So we have the IPR defense and the exports defense, which are provided under subsection 5 to section 3. What is to be, however, noted is that this defense may not be applicable to section 4 cases because it's not explicitly provided in the Act. However, the Commission, as a practice, have been applying this the IPR defense in section 4 cases also. Coming to the second limb of the argument, that will be the efficiency justifications that parties can advance to offset any adverse effect on competition. Can you have the previous slide, please? Sorry, Charms. Slide number 19. 19. Slide 19, please. Okay. The efficiency justification that the parties can advance to offset any market foreclosure or anti-competitive effects caused by an agreement. And third limb of the argument would be any objective justifications that the parties can advance. So I would like to hedge my comments by saying that this is not the it's not an exhaustive list of defenses that the parties can advance. This is just an indicative list, but however, defenses are broadly advanced under these categories. So I will deal with each of these defenses in detail, except for the market power part, which has already been covered by Mr. Sharma. So can we move on to the next slide, please? Yeah. Coming to the next slide. So I'll cover the IPR defense first. So the subsection 5 of section 3, it provides that the holder of an intellectual property may impose reasonable restrictions which are necessary for the protection of intellectual property rights and provided. So I'll be dealing with two cases under the IPR defense. One is the Shamsher Kataria case, where the Commission upheld the IPR defense. The Commission rejected. Commission rejected the IPR defense, and secondly, I'll be covering the OYO case, where the Commission recently upheld the IPR defense. In Shamsher Kataria, there were two broad categories of exclusive arrangements that the Commission was dealing with. One is the restriction placed on dealers to only source from the OEMs or the approved. the previous slide, please. Only sourced from the approved dealers or the OEMs itself. Second is the restriction on the dealers themselves to only sell to not sell to third-party vendors. So in that particular case, which was initially the Commission's position, the Commission took a very narrow interpretation of the IPR defense provided under subsection 5. What the Commission held was that in order to avail of the IPR defense, parties have to first establish that they enjoy such IPR protection under the relevant IPR intellectual property laws in India. So why the Commission had to say this, because the parties argued that their parent companies hold the IPRs in their respective jurisdiction. However, the Indian subsidiaries were not holding such IPRs. So what the Commission held that it is not enough, it's not sufficient that the parent companies hold it in any foreign jurisdiction. It's sufficient, it has to be proved that the parties enjoy the sufficient IPR rights under the relevant laws in India. Secondly, coming to the second limb of what the Commission held with respect to the IPR defense. Next slide. Yeah. The Commission held that the concept of protection of IPR is qualified by the words necessary and reasonable. So what the Commission would ask itself is whether this restriction is necessary for the protection of the IPR rights. If the answer is affirmative, that this restriction is necessary, then the IPR defense will stand. Otherwise, if the rights can be protected even without the imposition of such restraint, then the Commission will then the IPR defense will not be applicable. And coming to the aspect of reasonability, what comes through is that the least restrictive condition will be what that the Commission will accept for an IPR defense. So this was the Commission's initial views. I will just sum it up that one, the Commission had taken a narrow interpretation of IPR rights. Parties can avail of the IPR defense only if they have been granted such rights under the relevant IPR laws in India. Number three, that it has to be necessary and reasonable in the context of protection of IPR rights. So these are the three conditions laid down by the Commission, the Shamsher Kataria order, for availing the IPR defense. Now I will discuss the OYO case, which is a recent case. It was passed by the Commission in July 2019. So what we can see is that the Commission appears to have broadened its views on the IPR defense. So in this case, this was a case of franchisee alleging that that OYO, the franchisor, has imposed an exclusivity condition on it. However, the Commission held that especially in cases of franchise agreements, the franchisor he shares a lot of know-how in the form of marketing as well as branding of a particular good, and therefore, or a service, and therefore the franchisor can avail of the IPR defense because know-how has been shared with the franchisee. So what we can see is that here the Commission did not expressly consider whether rights have been expressly granted under any of the IPR statutes, and merely by saying that the franchisee has the benefit of know-how shared by the franchisor, the Commission allowed the exclusivity condition to stand. And coming to the second exception, which is provided under subsection 5 itself, which is the export defense. If a restriction is part of an agreement which solely relates to export, then the export defense is applicable to parties. the premise for this exception is that since the the good or service relates solely to export, it is not likely to cause any appreciable adverse effect on competition in India. However, again, I have to stress that these two exceptions are not per se applicable to Section 4 cases. If a dominant enterprise is imposing a vertical restraint in case of exports, then this may be applicable. This may not be, the exception may not be applicable. So the first is the IPR, the exceptions provided under the Act. Second, we come to the efficiency justifications that the parties can advance. The next slide, please. So efficiency justifications are advanced by parties when the adverse effect of competition is demonstrated by an anti-competitive agreement. So if it is demonstrated that an anti-competitive agreement forecloses competition, parties can advance arguments to the effect that there are efficiency gains caused by the due to the agreement. So once the parties advance efficiency arguments, the commission basically they carry out a balancing act and they weigh the pros and cons, the anti-competitive effects on one side, and the efficiency gains propounded by the parties on the other hand. And if the efficiency gains outweigh the anti-competitive effects, then the commission may allow the agreement to stand. So the efficiency justifications are provided under clauses D, E, and F of subsection 3 of section 19. So as you can see, they are accrual of benefits to consumers, improvements in production, and innovation, etc. So coming to the last part. So now first we cover the exceptions. Second, we have the efficiency justification, and thirdly is the objective justification or commercial rationale that can be advanced by parties. Can we have the next slide, please? Yeah. So the commercial rationale has already been covered by Mr. Bhasin in great detail. So in business scenarios, there are n number of situations and n number of commercial justifications that parties can advance, and what we have tried to reproduce to show you today is some of the examples that we have encountered in our practice. What is to be noted is that these justifications, some of these justifications can also double up as efficiency gains. For example, I point your attention to point number 2, wherein to achieve economies of scale, the supplier would want the buyer to offtake a specified quantity of product. So because the idea is that because the buyer is offtaking an X quantity of goods, he is allowed a discounted price. So this ultimately translates to cost benefits for the consumers, which can also be argued as an efficiency, can be advanced as an efficiency argument under subsection 3 of 19 in the form of accrual of benefits to consumers. So these are a few examples of commercial justifications that can be advanced by parties in an exclusive supply agreement, which is like, for example, where a buyer specific investment has been made by a supplier, as in like he invests in production lines to ensure that he can service a particular customer, and therefore he would require the customer to offtake a specified quantity to ensure that he does not run into loss. So these are some examples of commercial justifications that can be advanced in case of exclusive supply agreements.
I have to interrupt you. Can you be a little faster, please?
Yeah, just one more slide, sir. Coming to the next slide. Next slide, please. Yeah, so these are some examples of commercial justifications that can be advanced in case of exclusive distribution agreements. So we can there's clearly a precedent here in the form of Ashish Ahuja, where there was a restriction on the sale of products only through authorized dealers. So the commission held that such restrictions are required to protect the brand image of the product, especially. So these play these kind of justifications are very product specific though. So in case of Ashish Ahuja, it was a case where the brand image and goodwill had to be protected because the product in question was a quality driven product. So you can see the other examples where exclusive distribution agreements can be justified by commercial rationale. Uniformity and quality standardization. So having a restricted number of distributors will enable the supplier to have more control over how the goods are sold and whether quality has been maintained with respect to the sale of a particular good. And next slide, please. Okay, so can I go back to slide number 19, please? So I will quickly summarize the defenses available. Slide number 19. I'll quickly summarize the defenses available. One is, of course, the lack of market power, and therefore there is no appreciable adverse effect on competition. Number two is the exceptions provided under the Act itself, under subsection 5 of Section 3. 3 is the efficiency justifications that can be advanced by the parties. And number 4 is any objective justification or economic justification that can be advanced by the parties. That is all from my side. If you have any comments, please.
Thank you, Anand.
I will hand over
I think we have already short by 10 minutes, and I'll try to summarize like this: that I and Anand have tried to show that CCI in its decisional practice has shown that it is not going to adopt the form-based approach of the market share thresholds, as is done in the case of Euro, but it is also open to consider other factors, which we have demonstrated to few by the help of the cases. And that is why the exclusivity as a clause is both sides. I mean, it can put you to trouble, but you can also be saved if you can bring on those defenses which we just demonstrated to you. Either you don't have market power, of course, that is the foremost. That if you have market power, please consider consulting experts whether to go with the exclusivity clause in the agreement or not, because the foreclosure remains a great possibility. But if you don't have the market power, if you are maybe between still below 30%, for example, and there is enough competition in the market, certainly you can consider having it, because there are other factors which will be seen. For example, are you one of the unavoidable trading partner of your counterparty, or have you given some credit to him, for example? So there are various defenses available. Apart from what Anand of course said, they are the most accepted defense, like IPR defense. Like for export, you can create these kind of clauses. And then there is highly relation-specific investment, as we saw in the case of Jindal Steel Power and Steel Authority of India. So in that case, the SAIL had invested for that particular grade of steel which makes rails, and because it had invested in that particular and only for the buyer, so it was a buyer-specific investment. So the CCI considered that also as a mitigating factor to close the case. Although the MOU between the Steel Authority and the Ministry of Railways for 10 years, and all Jindal Steel wanted was to come as a competitor and to open the market for bidding. But CCI did not agree because they find that the buyer-specific investment were huge, made by SAIL, and there were no other buyer. So these are various considerations which the CCI in its decisional practice has shown that they are willing to consider. So basically the point remains that there is self-assessment required by the parties while entering into these agreements with exclusive clauses. Whether it is, and moreover, I will also like to emphasize on the duration part. Please take care that the clauses are not beyond 5 years. That is the most acceptable period which you can have. And in case of IPR, for example, your exclusivity can go on beyond 5 years also, but it should not go beyond the period of your patent. For example, in case of pharmaceutical, so you can have a kind of exclusivity for the period of your patent when it is valid, but if you want to extend it beyond period of patent, then it will come into what is known as sweetheart deals or prolonging the life of patent, which is not allowed. So there are antitrust inquiries already on in Europe and America, and also I understand in India recently. So with this, we'll stop. If there are questions, maybe Charles will take it through or take us through. So Charles, please appear and then give us questions.
Hello, good evening, viewers. First of all, I would like to thank you for being here. I hope we helped your cause a bit. So without wasting any more time, I've noted a few questions, sir. I don't think they are specific to somebody, so whoever prefers. So the first question is from Ilam Kamboj. The question is, can companies penalize the distributors for selling goods outside of their mutually decided geography?
Okay, Anand, would you like to answer it?
Question is whether companies can penalize distributors for selling outside their allocated geography,
Yeah.
right?
Mutually decided geography, yes.
Yeah, so again, that is a very fact-specific question. It depends. The answer is it depends. The first question is whether the supplier has the market power. Number two, why is there a requirement for a territorial restriction, etc., etc. So that is a very fact-specific questions, and the answer is it depends upon the facts and circumstances of a case. Yes, this the territorial restrictions are an exclusive distribution agreement as defined under subsection 4 of section 3 of the Act. Therefore, it has to be seen whether the agreement causes AAC or not. Yes.
I will add to what Anand said, Mr. Kamboj. Thank you for this question. It's a very pertinent question. And my answer would be yes. If you have territories which are well defined in the agreement, but it will depend whether what kind of restriction you are placing in your agreement. If you are restricting the dealer from active selling beyond the territories, and still he is doing that active selling beyond territory, you can penalize, because that is accepted as a defense. But if you are restricting the dealer from passive selling, I think I made myself clear in the beginning, then certainly it will not be allowed.
Okay, moving on. Next question is from Mr. Rohit Lala. He's asking, when e-commerce promotes their brand on their website or app, could that be a trigger to competition for others? Like, could that trigger competition challenges for others?
Mr. Lala, thank you for your question. It will not, because promotional activities are always recognized as a necessary and ancillary business practice for entering the market. So if you are a new incumbent, you have to promote your product. There's nothing wrong in it. Of course, others may do free ride, that's a different thing. And for that, you have a defense of exclusivity. You can make exclusive dealers even when you are entering a market for a certain period. So per se, promotional activities by advertisement by e-commerce players are not competition concerns for us.
Okay. Should I move on?
Yes. Next question, please.
If I can just add a facet to what Mr. Sharma is saying.
Mr.
Obviously, e-com today, as you have said in some of the examples, it has not been considered as a dominant market. But assume a scenario where one of the e-com is considered as dominant market, and then they have access to information of other competitors on how other competitors are selling, and they use that information to promote their own products on the platform, right? I think the situation will be very, very different. I'm just giving a food for thought to the question. I think the question came also from that point of view, that whether they can promote their own products on the on the platform by using the information, because they have a different kind of information access in comparison to other competitors. So just thought of adding that
I appreciate this your comment, Mr. Bhasin, but that is what is called data usage. This comes to data privacy. So they use data, of course. Those are areas which are beyond this topic we are discussing. But yes, what you're saying is absolutely right. That if the e-commerce player, even if they are dominant or not, we don't know. But if they use data which is privy to them, the users' data, and then on that basis they enter into other businesses which of other players, it depends that how much what is the extent of restraint, or what is the extent of entry which they are making, whether it is creating an entry barrier for others. So there are questions which are subjective basically, but yes, that is possible. But per se, I'm answering very simply that per se a promotional activity is not a competition issue. That remains what it is.
No, so I just want to add to what Mr.
Yeah, please.
Bhasin had introduced. So recently we came across the Google case where in the search engine, Google was promoting the Google Flights at the expense of other websites providing similar services. So this was held to be an abuse of dominant position, and this became relevant because Google was dominant in the search engine space. So
Yeah.
where a enterprises present in both the marketplace platform as well as the a product platform like a smartphone, and they use the dominance in the marketplace platform to promote sales in the smartphone market, then it could raise competition law concerns.
Yeah, it's all fact specifics. So since the full facts are not there, so we cannot give a complete or foolproof answer as at this stage. So Mr. Lala, you can basically send an email with more facts. Maybe then we can come back and revert to you.
Okay, moving on. So this question is from Umang Motiani. The question is, are there any guidelines which CCI follow in differentiating between exclusivity agreements to increase efficiency on one side versus agreement which could lead another player to exit from the market?
Anand, you take it.
Sorry, Jams, can you please repeat it?
Are there any guidelines which CCI follow in differentiating between exclusivity agreements which increase efficiency versus agreement which could lead another player to exit from the market?
Again, I missed the question, but what I could hear from the limited video that got through was that is there any guidelines prescribed by the CCI while examining the efficiency provisions under Section 19? Is that the question?
Sir, of what I understand, this person wants to ask whether CCI follows any guidelines in assessing assessing the efficiency versus the exit of a market, like the balance.
Yeah, so there is no hard and fast rule that the commission follows. I mean, again, it's a very case-specific analysis that the commission will undertake, and that will depend on a lot of factors, including the nature of the market, how many players are there in the market, what is the entry barrier to a particular market, switching costs, etc. So it's a very market-specific assessment that the commission undertakes, and there is no hard and fast rule that the commission has to stick by while weighing the pro and anti-competitive effects.
Okay. So one more question. The person asks, person actually tells that they see a lot of movie halls specially selling one kind of product, either Pepsi or Coca-Cola. So is that a classic example of exclusivity?
Mr. Sharma can take the question. I think he is experienced in dealing with
Anand, you tell this. Let us see.
So again, this
there was a case on this decided recently.
Yeah, again we go back to the first defense that any party will take, whether the movie hall imposing such exclusivity condition has market power, to foreclose the market? If the answer is yes, then of course it may raise competition concerns. But if the answer is no, and it's just a standalone movie hall imposing the condition, then it may not.
So again, the foreclosure possibility has to be seen in terms of its market power, which the party imposing, whether it has or not. That is the answer.
Yeah.
Okay, next questions.
So I believe that's all. That's all the questions. Should I just check once
Thank
more?
you very much. So thanks for attending this webinar, friends, and I find that some of you have remained.
Sir, a lot
on
of people are
the webinar.
asking,
Thank
can
you
they
very
get the
much.
presentation later?
You can get the recordings of this webinar later on, and I hope you enjoyed it. Then we'll follow it with the next webinar after some time. As I said, on online sales, internet e-commerce companies. It's a very hot topic, depending on the response we get from the audience. So thank you, Mr. Basid, again for your inputs, and Anand and my colleagues, Charms, both of you. And with this, I think we've already overshot by
Thank you,
26
Mr.
minutes.
Yeah, we have exceeded our time, so we should.
Sir, one last thing. A lot of participants are asking whether they will be getting the presentation via a link or something. Is it?
No, you can see we will be giving the recording of this proceeding, but if you want the PPT, you'll have to send the email to the slide which is being shown. Please note down my email which is there.
Can be seen in the top
I
left
will
corner.
send the person who wants it. So with this, we conclude this webinar. I hope it has been of some use to the persons who have attended it. And this is our first attempt to increase knowledge of the corporate, so that the cobwebs are removed, the confusions are gone. And as far as this particular issue of exclusivity is concerned, my last advice to you is it requires self-assessment by each company, and that depends on various factors. So we will advise that before going for these clauses in the agreements, it is better to have consultations with experts. Thank you very much.